Namaskar. Hello, friends. We will start looking at the concept of knowledge versus Jnaan. What is worldly knowledge and what is spiritual knowledge? Here is an attempt at distinguishing between worldly and spiritual knowledge. Spiritual knowledge is referred to as Jnana, or in Hindi Gyan, as per Indian spiritual philosophy. Jnana is actually a different level of perception that is quite different from the kind of perception ordinary human beings have. The ultimate objective of spiritual pursuit is to attain that kind of perception. Now we'll go point by point and compare worldly knowledge with spiritual knowledge, that is Jnana. Firstly, basically worldly knowledge is empirical information received from a worldly teacher, whereas spiritual knowledge is internal revelation from a divine source. Worldly knowledge is received as inputs to our physical senses. Spiritual knowledge, on the other hand, is not received through physical senses, but rather as an inner experience. Worldly knowledge, the underlying truth of worldly knowledge can be demonstrated easily to anyone, whereas the underlying truth of spiritual knowledge can only be experienced by an individual. Worldly knowledge can be expressed in languages. Spiritual knowledge cannot be adequately expressed in any language. Worldly knowledge can be easily and accurately shared with others, but spiritual knowledge cannot be easily shared accurately. Only a vague idea can be given, and that too just as a pointer. Worldly knowledge can be obtained at the normal consciousness, whereas spiritual knowledge needs a different level of consciousness. Worldly knowledge can be fitted in a rational and logical framework. In fact, logic is a part and parcel of worldly knowledge and gets refined as knowledge progresses. On the contrary, spiritual knowledge cannot be fitted into a rational and logical framework, since it is quite unlike the worldly knowledge. Worldly knowledge is a function of space and time, but spiritual knowledge is independent of space and time constraints. Worldly knowledge goes on adding more layers to the bodily ego, whereas spiritual knowledge dissolves bodily ego. Worldly knowledge causes the separation between I and others to become more pronounced. On the contrary, spiritual knowledge unites everything into oneness. Let's see in more detail what spiritual knowledge or Jnana is. Normally, we understand knowledge to be stuff that sits inside our brain in the form of data and patterns. This kind of knowledge is typically obtained by reading books, listening to others, and above all, through our own personal experiences, and it is essentially language based. Is spiritual knowledge of a similar kind? Is it what we read from scriptures or listen in the discourses by gurus and store in our memory for recall later? I think spiritual knowledge is not of the above kind. I feel spiritual knowledge relates to a different, higher level of consciousness itself. The perception that we then have at that level of consciousness is the true Jnana, when it is no more our physical senses that are feeding us inputs to give us an illusory perception. At that higher level of consciousness, The perception of I itself is different. It is no more limited to the body. Revelation of true knowledge. Once you are convinced that you want to explore the knowledge domain beyond the mind-body organism, it is first necessary to decondition your mind. You have to train your mind to gradually stop indulging in its occupations that it has been used to thus far. Unless mind is emptied of its past conditioning, it will not be in a position to accommodate new knowledge. It will habitually keep indulging in the same old processes, and you will remain stuck in the same old groove. For deconditioning, you must first stop wanting to do this or that. Typically, your mind would tell you to do one of the things that you have been used to doing and you feel comfortable doing. You should tell yourself that I am first emptying my mind of all the muck that I have gathered so far. Then I will see what can take its place subsequently. Unless you make a conscious effort towards this, you are unlikely to be able to switch track towards the goal of attaining moksha. Another way of looking at deconditioning is as follows. Every one of us, in a spiritual sense, is basically a divine being that is no different from the Creator Himself. But when we come into this world of objects, by assuming a mind-body organism and taking up an identity with that particular mind-body organism, which is the ego, we forget our true identity from before we came into this world. Then we keep gathering various experiences through our sense organs, based on which our mind develops desires and fears. Throughout our lives, we remain slaves of our mind and keep striving to fulfill our desires and avoid fears. Now, unless and until we discard this preoccupation with desires and undesires or fears and false identification with our mind-body organism, we cannot see our true identity as the divine being. You may liken this scenario to a mirror that is basically capable of reflecting the true identity of the object before it. But if it collects dust and such muck on its surface, the reflection in the mirror is not true, or it is distorted, or it is partial. Now, the mirror itself is fundamentally still the same, but its external attribute has changed due to the dirt. For the mirror to get back its original attribute of true reflection, the only thing required is to discard or clean the dirt from the surface, and the true quality of the mirror is revealed again. In other words, it is a one-step process of just removing the cause behind the distortion of the mirror's quality, identity. No second step is necessary of putting back the correct identity. In the same way, we just need to cleanse ourselves of the false identity. That is all the conditioning of the mind-body organism acquired from our birth. And our true identity will be immediately revealed to us, since it was never lost or destroyed, but only temporarily veiled by a false identity. That is why our scriptures say that avidya or ajnana, which is false or distorted knowledge, is the cause of this illusory world of samsara. Once we manage to get rid of the avidya or ajnana, the real vidya or jnana that has always been present is simply revealed back to us. Wise people over the ages have believed that jnana does not have to be acquired. It is always present. It is only revealed through our efforts towards self-realization. Is enlightenment an instantaneous event? Enlightenment appears to have happened to many in a moment. For example, it is believed that Siddhartha became enlightened to become Gautam Buddha at one fine moment. Does it mean enlightenment actually happens in a moment? Probably not. I like to believe that it is akin to, say, the overflowing of a water tank. From outside, it appears as if the water has started overflowing at one specific moment. However, the process of water falling in the tank was going on without our seeing it for some time before that moment of overflowing. Only the manifestation of overflowing is instantaneous. Similarly, when a seeker has been engaged in spiritual practice for a long time, he may at one moment become enlightened and see his true self. I will stop here today and continue the next time. We'll take up different paths to liberation the next time. Until then, bye, take care.